Hello, I'm Chris Williams from Read Comics, They're Bad For You, the name of my YouTube channel. Or if you're watching this on BitChute, the name of my BitChute channel is Comic Freak. Warner Media has found their man to lead their DC movies into the future, or at least they're heavily hinting at it. That man is now the current head of DC Comics and has now been picked to oversee the DCEU movies going forward into the future. Or the executive producer Matt Cunningham is heavily hinting at it. Warner Brothers and DC movie franchise is currently tracking a different course with more emphasis on solo movies, and seems like Jim Lee will be the man to oversee their projects moving forward. The studio has long produced comic book adaptations of the big screen, but their plans for an interconnected franchise similar to Marvel Studios' MCU only really began in 2013 via Zack Snyder, Henry Cavill's Man of Steel, which kicked off the DCEU. Since then, they've released several more films in the hopes of building their own universe. Unfortunately, things didn't go as well as they hoped it would be. So DC, out of ideas, has decided to use a man who for years has worked tirelessly for DC, promoting its characters, who's basically the, DC equivalent to Stan Lee right now. That would be Jim Lee, who has overseen many of DC's most recent and profitable comic books. So instead of using a Hollywood elite who's used to making movies, they decided to use a man who's used to making comic books to make movies. Someone who could possibly adapt those stories from the page to the big screen. But that's my own personal opinion on what I think DC is thinking right now. Let's get back to this article. To say that the DCEU was off to a rocky start would be an understatement. While the films did well in the box office department, most of them were critically divisive. It didn't help that production woes were made public, specifically the ones that plagued Justice League. Amidst all that, Warner Brothers was able to make some necessary adjustments to ensure that they have a sustainable slate moving forward. That involves veering away from interconnectivity. Instead, solo projects are prioritized, with a slew of them in their pipeline. As the studio continues to work their way on their lineup, it seems like Lee would be the man to lead them to these new era of DC movies. Though people should have their doubts about Jim Lee, he's great at comic books. Not have I ever heard has he ever been or had any inkling to have anything to do with movies. But I have to say it's surprising that Warner Media is willing to trust a man who has never shown in the past to have any interest in movies or making movies, or have any experience with it. But then again, he's only overseeing the projects, and he might be able to tell these directors of how to bring these characters to life, finally. But still, this is immensely surprising news to have heard happened over at DC and Warner Media. In light of the surprising cameo from Ezra Miller's Flash in the CW's Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, where he met his small-screen counterpart played by Grant Gustin, Arrowverse executive producer Mark Cunningham was asked how they are able to pull such a feat. In an interview with Variety, the showrunner was asked if the events of the TV special means that Ezra's movie Flash no longer exists, considering that going through the multiverse was to ensure that there's only one version of each hero existing. Cunningham declined to comment and instead directed queries to the studio, and surprisingly, I will leave that question to Warner Brothers and DC. They have a wonderful version for not just Ezra's Flash, but also the entire DC universe. Jim Lee is the man to talk to, he said. Well, with producer Mark Cunningham mentioning Jim Lee by name, I guess they really do feel comfortable using Jim Lee as the overseer of all DC projects over at Warner Media now. I mean, Mark Cunningham basically put Jim Lee's name out there, which means they are heavily using his help over on the, TV side of the DC projects, so it would make sense that he would be overseeing the movie projects as well. I mean, why would Mark Cunningham even mention Jim Lee's name unless Jim Lee was heavily connected to him somehow? Unless DC decided to use Mark Cunningham to put Jim Lee's name out there into the public eye so that people would know the name when he became the head of DC. While Cunningham didn't directly say that Lee is creatively in charge of the DC movie franchise, his answer implies that he has knowledge as to how Warner Brothers is planning to tackle their film universe moving forward. An all-around comic book publisher, Lee started as an artist for Marvel Comics in 1987, but he's mostly known for his work under DC There, he alongside Jeff Jones launched the New 52, which relaunched 52 new stories with #1 issues, essentially rebooting the print universe for the brand. Currently, Lee is the Chief Creative Officer of DC Comics, coincidentally a position previously held by Johns before he stepped down in 2018. It's worth noting, however, that Walter Hamada is still the president of DC Film Production, which gives him the authority over what kind of projects are greenlit. Yeah, I can see why Warner Media would trust Jim Lee with this position, because the position he currently has now was vacated by Jeff Jones, who was the guy who helped him with the relaunch of the New 52. So it would make sense that they would trust another man who has the same kind of expertise and know-how of making comic books that Jeff Jones has. So it would make sense that Lee would be the Chief Creative Officer of DC Comics with his knowledge after Jeff Jones left, but how does that translate to working on movies, I have to say? Jim Lee could be a figurehead set up by Warner Media to make people think they're doing something good with their movies. You know, basically Jim Lee being the DC equivalent of, well, Stan Lee from Marvel Comics. A figurehead or not for DC, let's get back to this article and finish it off first. All that being said, Hamada's position doesn't mean that there's no room for Lee, as they can fulfill different roles in the organization. As Hamada oversees more of the business side of things, acting as a traditional producer, Lee can focus on the creative side of the operations. While Marvel Studios has Kevin Feige juggling both roles for the MCU, Warner Brothers and DC can structure their executive lineup in a way that will work the best for them. Well, that could just sum up what Jim Lee's role actually is. He's going to be working, as it's said, on all of the technical and all of the story issues with the DCCU. Well, of course, Walter Hamada handles the money and basically greenlights the projects, which means Jim Lee will be overseeing the movies. Let's say The Joker. That's a good example. How does Jim Lee's expertise handle with something like The Joker? The Joker, well, 2019 was a movie starring a differently named clown. They only changed the name to Joker when they realized that the character really was very much like the comic book counterpart. It was supposed to be, as I understand, Harley Quinn. If they had kept that name and released it under that name, they would probably still be asked why they didn't release the movie under the name Joker, because the character really is very much like the Joker, but that's only on a surface detail. If you know the character, you'll know there's a complete difference between them. The Joker 2019 is about a guy who ends up causing a street riot, while the actual Joker from the comics is a supervillain who has schemes, and when he fulfills those schemes, he can create a mass amount of fear and chaos from a plan. What happened in the Joker was that this guy caused one by happenstance. He didn't plan it out, it just happened. So you can't really say they're the same character. Warner Media only changed the name from Harley Quinn to get the, well, name recognition that the Joker would naturally come with. And how does this relate to Jim Lee? Well, how does Jim Lee's experience relate to overseeing a movie like The Joker, which is from your usual comic book fare as you can get? I mean, it's basically about real people with their real problems, and I mean mental issues, going insane and basically tearing down society. This isn't really capes and, well, hero work, you know. So how does Jim Lee's experience with those kinds of stories and telling them relate to making, well, movies like The Joker, or say a horror movie like, say, Halloween or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? I mean, real filmmaking here. All in all, it just sounds like they're taking a chance with Jim Lee, but he has had over 30 years experience telling stories, so he could do a really good job at this. We'll just have to wait and see. If you like this video, subscribe. Make sure you're still subscribed, because YouTube is going around unsubscribing people, so make sure you're still subscribed. If you're watching my videos but you're not subscribed, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Read Comics They're Bad For You. Then go over to Library and subscribe to my Library channel, Comic Freak. Then go over to BitChute and subscribe to my BitChute channel that is also named Comic Freak. Hit that bell for notifications, hit that like button, and leave some comments down below. Also, could you please share this video? Share it on Twitter, share it on Reddit, and share it on Facebook. Share it anywhere you think it'll do the most good, because YouTube is not going around promoting their own YouTube creators anymore, and it would really help me if you could please share this video. Now listen closely. Keep checking back in all my future videos for more information on my own upcoming independent comic book scumdogs. I'm Chris Williams, and I'll be back again tomorrow with another video or review.